Last episode, Dad found a glowing notebook. It said, Operation Rizz. Now, most people would see a mysterious glowing notebook and immediately decide not to touch it. My father is not most people. Instead of sleeping like a normal human being, he spent half the night reading it like it contained the answers to life itself. That should have been my warning. It wasn't. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting breakfast. What I found instead was Dad, waiting, just sitting there. Perfect posture, notebook open, chai ready, looking like he was about to conduct a job interview. The moment I entered the room, he slowly looked up. The kind of slow look movie villains give before revealing their master plan. Then he adjusted his glasses. Beta. Whenever an Indian parent starts a sentence with beta, something bad is about to happen. What is Rizz? I froze. Not emotionally, physically. I genuinely stopped moving. My brain needed a moment to process what had just happened. Of all the questions in the universe, why this one? Dad sat patiently, waiting. I sat down slowly. Rizz is basically charisma. Dad nodded. Okay. Confidence. Dad nodded again. Okay. Charm. Dad leaned back, thinking, processing, calculating. Then he pointed directly at himself. So I have it. No. The answer came out way too fast. Dad looked offended. How do you know? Because that's not how this works. You just said confidence. That's not what I meant. You said charm. Not like that. Dad folded his arms. I think you're being biased. I immediately knew I was losing this argument. And then the worst thing happened. Mom arrived. Now here's something important about Mom. Nobody knows how she does it. But the second new information enters this house, she appears. It's like she has a secret alarm system. 1 second, she doesn't exist. The next second, she's sitting at the table holding coffee. What's happening? Nobody answered. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at me. I looked at the exit. The exit looked very far away. What is Rizz? Mom asked. And just like that, our problems doubled. I tried explaining, carefully, slowly, using examples. Rizz means people naturally like you. Mom nodded. Okay. It means confidence. Mom nodded. Okay. It means charisma. Mom nodded again. Okay. Everything seemed fine. Too fine. That's when I became suspicious, because whenever Mom listens this carefully, something terrible usually follows. Dad wasn't helping. Dad had opened the notebook again, and now he was taking notes. Actual notes, like this information would be on an exam later. I looked over. The page said, Rizz Research. Underneath that was, Subject 1, Dad. I immediately closed the notebook. No. Dad grabbed it back. Science requires documentation. You're not doing science. We don't know that yet. Mom nodded seriously. We really don't. This family is impossible. I continued explaining. At this point, I was basically teaching a university lecture. Meanwhile, Dad was writing. Mom was listening. And somehow I had become the only responsible person in the room, which was terrifying, because I'm literally the child. Finally, after what felt like an hour, I finished. Silence. Mom sat there, thinking, coffee mug in hand, completely motionless. Dad looked excited. I looked nervous. Mom slowly nodded, then nodded again, then nodded one more time. The kind of nod that means somebody has reached a dangerous conclusion. I understand. Dad smiled, a huge smile, the smile of a man who knew chaos was coming. I stared at Mom. No. No, she didn't. She absolutely did not understand. But the problem wasn't whether she understood. The problem was that she believed she understood. And confidence has never stopped Mom before. Suddenly, she stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, grabbed a notepad, grabbed a pen, turned around dramatically. Dad looked impressed. I looked concerned. What are you doing? Mom clicked the pen. The next phase. There is no next phase. There is now. Dad nodded. Excellent initiative. I could actually feel the situation getting worse. Mom looked at her notes. looked at me, looked at Dad, then smiled, not a normal smile, the kind of smile people get right before they accidentally create a national crisis. I think I know exactly how Rizz works. Dad looked amazed. I looked terrified, because deep down, I already knew what was about to happen, and unfortunately, I was right. No, she didn't. She absolutely did not understand. The very next day, Mom began testing her new theory, and the first victim was a dog. We were out for a walk when our neighbor's Pomeranian Biscuit walked past. That was it. He just walked past. Normal dog behavior, nothing unusual. Mom stopped walking immediately. She pointed at Biscuit like she had just discovered a rare species. That dog has Rizz. I looked at the dog, then at Mom, then back at the dog. The dog was literally just existing. Mom, it's a dog. Exactly. What does that mean? Look at him. We looked. Biscuit sat down. That was all he did. He sat down. Mom nodded slowly. Elite Rizz. The dog barked. Mom nodded again. As I suspected. Dad immediately opened his notebook. He had started carrying it everywhere. Under Biscuit's name, he wrote, confident, calm, strong aura. I grabbed the notebook. Dad, stop encouraging her. Dad took it back. Science cannot be rushed. This isn't science. We're collecting data. No, you're not. Mom pointed at Biscuit again. We're definitely collecting data. And somehow, Dad agreed. For the next 20 minutes, Mom followed that poor dog around the neighborhood. Every normal thing Biscuit did became evidence. Biscuit walked. Rizz. Biscuit sat down. More Rizz. Biscuit ignored everyone. Maximum Rizz. At one point, the dog sneezed. Mom wrote something down. I didn't even ask. I was afraid of the answer. Unfortunately, Biscuit was only the beginning. By lunch, Mom had started seeing Rizz everywhere. A tree, a scooter, a pigeon, a vegetable cart, a mailbox, a random bench. Nothing was safe. We'd be walking normally, and suddenly Mom would stop, point dramatically, and announce, Rizz! Then Dad would write it down, every single time. Tree, Rizz, scooter, Rizz, pigeon, unexpected Rizz. The worst part was Dad. Dad wasn't helping. Dad never helps. Every time Mom identified something new, Dad treated it like a major scientific breakthrough. Interesting. Excellent observation. Strong evidence. At one point, Mom pointed at a traffic cone. Dad wrote 3 full sentences. I have no idea what they said, and honestly, I don't want to know. 3 days later, I came home from school. The house was suspiciously quiet. That should have worried me. Instead, I walked into the living room and immediately regretted it. A giant whiteboard had appeared. A giant whiteboard. In our living room, covering half the wall. There were charts, graphs, arrows, notes, highlights. Dad had clearly been involved. At the top, in giant letters, it said, The Family Rizz Leaderboard. I stood there, frozen. Mom proudly held a marker. Dad stood beside her like a proud assistant. Then I looked at the rankings. Mom was number 1. Of course she was. Dad was number 2. Somehow. Then came number 3, Biscuit, the dog, the actual dog. The dog had outranked me. I looked further down. Number 4, me. I had lost to a Pomeranian. I wasn't happy. Then I kept reading, and things somehow got worse. Number 5 was a fern, a plant, an actual plant. I stared at the whiteboard, then at Mom, then back at the whiteboard, then back at Mom. Why am I below a fern? Mom didn't even look up. The fern has presence. I waited. Surely there was more explanation coming. There wasn't. That was the explanation. The fern has presence. Dad nodded, completely serious. I noticed that too. I genuinely could not believe what I was hearing. It's a plant. Mom folded her arms. It's a confident plant. Dad nodded again, very confident. At this point, I wasn't even arguing anymore. I was just trying to survive. Mom continued updating the leaderboard. Dad continued taking notes. The fern continued doing absolutely nothing, and somehow, its ranking kept improving. That's when I realized something. This wasn't a phase anymore. This was becoming a system, a dangerous system. And unfortunately, it was only getting started. I wish I could tell you the leaderboard was the end. It wasn't. If anything, that was only the beginning. Because once Mom finished ranking the family, she moved on to the public. And that's when things got dangerous. It started with WhatsApp. Every disaster in our family eventually reaches WhatsApp. One morning, I woke up to 37 notifications. Mom had sent a message to the family group. It said, "Good morning, Rizzlers." I stared at my phone. Then I stared at the ceiling. Then I stared at my phone again. The message was real. My uncle replied first. "What is a Rizzler?" "Big mistake," Mom explained. Then my aunt asked. Mom explained again. Then another uncle asked. Mom explained again. Within an hour, the entire family group was discussing Rizz. One uncle changed his status to "living life with maximum Rizz." Another started ending messages with "stay Rizzful." I didn't even know that was a word. Apparently, neither did he. The infection was spreading, and Mom was patient zero. Unfortunately, it didn't stop online. Mom started using the word "in real life." Everywhere. One day, we entered the elevator with a neighbor. Normal situation. Completely ordinary. The neighbor smiled politely. Mom smiled back. Then she said, "Nice Rizz." The neighbor froze. I froze. Dad nodded proudly. The elevator ride became the longest 30 seconds of my life. The neighbor didn't know whether to say thank you or call for help. By the time the elevator doors opened, everyone looked confused, except Mom. Mom looked proud. The next victim was the vegetable vendor. Mom bought tomatoes, then looked at him seriously. "You have strong Rizz." The poor man thought she was complimenting his vegetables. He gave us extra coriander. Mom considered this proof. Dad wrote it down immediately. Vendor positively responds to Rizz recognition. I wanted to disappear. Then came the milkman. Then the security guard. Then the delivery guy. Nobody escaped. At one point, Mom told a random stranger he had excellent Rizz posture. I don't even know what that means. Dad wrote it down anyway, and every single time I thought we had reached peak embarrassment, Mom somehow found a higher level. Then came Parent-Teacher Day, the event that nearly ended me. I should have known something bad was coming. Mom had been unusually quiet all morning. Dad looked excited, which is always a terrible sign. We arrived at school. The teacher welcomed us. Everything was normal for about 3 minutes. Then the teacher started discussing my grades. Mom listened carefully, nodded thoughtfully. Everything seemed safe. Then she raised her hand. My heart stopped. Whenever Mom raises her hand, history changes. The teacher smiled. "Yes?" Mom looked directly at him and said, "You have Sigma energy." Silence. Complete silence. The teacher blinked. I blinked. Dad looked impressed. I considered changing schools. The teacher thought about it for a second, then smiled and said, "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." That was somehow worse, because now Mom felt validated. Dad looked proud. The teacher looked happy. And I was sitting there wondering if it was possible to legally disappear. The entire meeting continued like nothing had happened. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked what Sigma energy meant. Everyone simply accepted it. I felt like I was losing my mind. But the truly scary part? Mom wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was getting stronger. She had become completely unstoppable. And that's when family dinner happened, the event that changed everything. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody was there. Food covered the entire table. People were talking, laughing, telling stories. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then one of my cousins mentioned Rizz. My heart immediately sank, because I already knew where this was going. One relative looked confused, then another, then another. Suddenly, half the table had the same question. What is Rizz? And then something happened that genuinely surprised me. Every single person at that table slowly turned toward Mom. Not Dad, not me, Mom, waiting for an explanation. Mom looked around the table. Dad smiled. I froze, and Mom opened her mouth. That's when I realized the real disaster was only just beginning. Every single person at that table turned toward Mom, waiting, expecting answers, and somehow, Mom looked completely comfortable. No panic, no hesitation, no confusion. Meanwhile, I was having all three. Mom put down her spoon, took a sip of water, and started explaining Rizz. Not badly, not randomly, not in the completely chaotic way I expected. She actually explained it perfectly. Rizz is basically charisma. The relatives nodded. Confidence, more nodding. Being naturally likable. Even more nodding. Within 2 minutes, every adult at the table understood. Within 5 minutes, they were discussing examples. Within 10 minutes, they were arguing about who had the most Rizz. And somehow, Mom had become the teacher. Again. I sat there watching this happen, completely confused, because for the first time all week, Mom was actually right. The scary part wasn't that she understood Rizz. The scary part was that everyone listened to her. Nobody interrupted, nobody questioned her. Everybody just accepted that Mom was now the leading expert on Rizz. And that's when I noticed something I should have noticed years ago. People actually liked Mom, a lot. Not because she tried, not because she wanted attention, not because she was studying internet slang. People just naturally liked being around her. The vegetable vendor always remembered her. The security guard always greeted her first. Neighbors stopped to talk to her. My friends came over to see me, and somehow ended up talking to Mom for 30 minutes. Every single time. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I started thinking about it. The vendor always gave her extra coriander. The bakery owner always remembered her order. The aunties in our society somehow knew everything about Mom's life despite only meeting her occasionally. And whenever Mom entered a room, people smiled. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just naturally, comfortably, like they were happy she was there. Then another memory hit me. A really annoying memory. Last year, my friends came over to work on a project. 3 hours later, they were sitting in the kitchen laughing with Mom. I was in my own room, waiting, in my own house, for my own friends. That should have been my first clue. Another memory. We went shopping. Mom started talking to a random stranger. 5 minutes later, they were exchanging recipes. How does that even happen? Another memory. Family weddings. Every wedding. Every function, every gathering. At some point, everyone somehow gathered around Mom, talking, laughing, sharing stories, and Mom wasn't trying. She never tried. She was just being herself. That's when it finally hit me. The problem wasn't that Mom had learned Rizz. The problem was that Mom already had Rizz. She always had. Years before TikTok. Years before slang, years before Dad discovered a glowing notebook. She just didn't know there was a word for it. And honestly, neither did I. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen making tea, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't accidentally become the professor of Rizz. I stood there for a second, then finally said, "Mom? I think you actually have Rizz." Mom looked at me, thought about it. For exactly 2 seconds, then shrugged, "I know," and went back to making tea. That was it. No speech, no celebration, no victory dance, just, "I know," like she had known the whole time. I stood there in complete silence, then Dad walked past. "Told you." I turned around. "You knew?" Dad smiled. "Since 1998. And then he walked away. For the first time all week, everything felt normal. No charts, no rankings, no Rizz research, no leaderboard, no scientific studies involving dogs, just peace. Beautiful peace. I sat on the couch. Mom was reading. The TV was on. Dad was quiet, and for one glorious moment, I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong, because later that night, Dad laughed. Not a normal laugh, the dangerous laugh. The laugh that means he has discovered something. Mom slowly lowered her book. I slowly looked up. Dad stood, walked toward the mysterious drawer, and opened it. A bright glow burst out. Wind everywhere, papers flying, movie trailer energy. Dad reached inside and pulled out a brand new notebook. The room went silent. Camera zoom. The cover read, NPC Manual. Pause. Silence. Dad opened the notebook. First page. How to identify NPCs. Dad gasped. Second page. Signs of NPC behavior. Dad gasped louder. Third page. Top 10 NPCs in your area. Mom immediately stood up, interested. That was the moment I knew we were doomed. Dad adjusted his glasses, looked completely serious, and said, "This changes everything." "No, it doesn't." "Yes, it does." "No, it doesn't." Mom leaned closer. Dad started taking notes. Mom started asking questions.